Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Comic Watchers. Comic Watchers is brought to you by Comic Watch. Comic Watch is your source for all your comics and media news and reviews written by fans for fans. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and click the subscribe button here on YouTube. I'm your host, Cody. It's been a long week for me. I'm not going to lie to you. And here is the rest of the crew.
Brian from Portland.
This is Matt from Oklahoma City.
And Nicholas from Carthage, Texas.
And you guys know me, I'm John Jack. I'm recording from downtown Seattle. And today I am joined by our press master, Ross Hutchinson.
All the way from Africa.
Ross!
Good one.
Ross, now that I've heard your accent, I love you more.
That's amazing.
Claw!
That's like the best surprise ever.
That is the best surprise ever. Well done, JJ.
Well done. Welcome,
the man
Ross.
who cannot keep his mouth shut managed to pull off the best surprise of the year. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you very much.
Obviously, we have a very exciting show for you guys today. We're going to change our format up just a little bit. We're going to do some tweaks. We're going to go from 3 books down to 2 because we don't want to bore the heck out of you guys. Mark can So this week we're going to be covering Absolute Carnage #1 from Marvel and Berserker Unbound #1 from Dark Horse. But to kick things off, we'll push it over to Brian for news.
Yeah, so
should we push it to Ross for news? Or no, let's give it to Brian for news. Let's keep things normal.
So as
He's
you
on
guys
vacation. Leave him alone.
Ross is actually my supervisor who oversees it. And this week sucks for news, so I literally have 3 small things. So this is the worst part of my job today is saying my news piece in front of Rossi. All right. So Black Widow apparently is going to be joining Conan on Savage Avengers, which kind of felt like a little bit of a shocker, but apparently in Spider-Man Friendly Neighborhood Spider, whichever one that one's called, Tom Taylor teased a little bit that he may actually, or Spider-Man actually may be passing away at some point, or that he's dead or missing. I haven't been keeping up. Does this sound familiar to any of you guys?
He said something about issue number 12 being a big one.
Yeah, 12.
Yeah, he tweeted out that there were reports that Tom Taylor killed Spider-Man in Spider-Man #12, and that he didn't do it on purpose.
Okay. I mean, that's fine. So, I mean, other than that, there's some big Stan Lee drama going on right now. His daughter came out formally and announced that they're trying to remove themselves completely away from PAL. There's some other news about, I'm actually going to write an article on it because there was a lot to go into all the details, but there's a lot of drama going on with the Stan Lee estate right now. And we've heard a little bit about it before, his previous manager is being sued for elder neglect or abuse. We heard about that a couple months ago. Some more information is coming to light. So here at Comic Watch, we'll definitely be checking out and staying tuned for all that information. I think we all love Stan Lee. I mean, if you're a comic book fan, you have to have some sort of respect for him. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that for what's to come. With that being said, that's all the news I have for this week. You can always go to our website for more news at comic-watch.com.
I would like to add a piece of news to that. This past weekend, I was at the Comic-Con Honolulu 2019, where David Mack let me know that yesterday, Wednesday, as he was departing Hawaii, he was headed for Los Angeles, where he'll meet up with Brian Michael Bendis to meet with several studios that have interest in making a cover TV series. We are the only news outlet that has that news. David gave that directly to me in a formal interview that will be up on Comic Watch very soon. But yeah, we're super excited. He was our Artist of the Year for 2018. I got to spend basically the whole weekend hanging out with David Mack, and he told me all kinds of stuff.
Wait, wouldn't it be our Artist of the Year for 2019?
No, because this year
No.
was 2000.
Yes.
No, I'm pretty sure we named him the 2019 Artist of the Year.
It was the art from 2018 that we were evaluating, B.
You do the award for the year before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we know who the greatest artist of this year is in February?
No, I get that, but when we named it, we put 2019 Artist of the Year.
No, it was the 2019 Watchies, but it was...
Right.
I'll have to go back and look. I'm too tired to even think about the semantics of this.
Didn't you say? Didn't I read somewhere that you said they're talking about cover 2?
Yeah, there is a second volume of Cover coming next year, and it is dependent on whether or not he and Brian are able to develop this other project, creator-owned project for DC that they're working on.
Okay.
As to how early that comes. So that might be the next thing from them, or it might be the next thing from them.
Oh, Max Superman. Give me some Max Superman. I saw those. I want to see more of that. He could write it too.
Right?
Do some parts of the whole type stuff with Superman. That'd be cool.
So, if there's no more news, our first book of the week is going to be Absolute Carnage #1 from Marvel. This was written by Donny Cates, drawn by Ryan Stegman, alternate covers by Chip Zdarsky, I believe, right? Amongst, some of the 300 alternate covers they released for this. So this is the start of a major event. It's crossing over into a bajillion short minis, one-shots. This tells the story of the return of Carnage in his attempts to revive the symbiote god Null, right? So he's hunting every person that's ever carried a symbiote has a piece of some codex in them, and Carnage is collecting them to put them all together in the hopes of reviving Null. Looks like we lost Matt.
He said his Wi-Fi was messing up and he was going to log out and back in.
Okay, got it. So it's a really good tale. It's got Eddie Brock reunited with the Venom symbiote and teaming up with Spider-Man to throw down against this ultimate god mode version of Carnage. And that's the gist of it. There's a lot of backstory here. There was a lot of one-shots that led up to this, but in general, it does read fairly self-contained in and of itself. It's an incredibly long book. It's broken into 3 parts. I believe it was the equivalent of 3 full issues for this first issue.
It was 64 pages.
Yeah, 64
so just
pages.
a hair shy.
Yeah.
We're just shy of 3 issues.
And this is the point in the show where I was supposed to be sending this over to Matt. So we'll have to come back to Matt, and we'll throw it over to JJ and Ross.
All right. So the first issue of Absolute Carnage, we'll do that at least 3 or 4 times, features us catching up with Eddie and Dylan, who we haven't seen, or who we last saw in the War of the Realms tie-in and the aftermath of the War of the Realms tie-in, are in New York City holding up in one of Rex Strickland's bunkers. But if you read the Free Comic Book Day issue, they did a Eddie Brock went to Rikers Island, but then it wasn't Eddie Brock, it was Carnage, and he killed Lee Price, who was Maniac. He killed him in Rikers, but he was since symbiotes could shapeshift, he looked like Eddie. So Eddie's the one who they were looking for. Eddie's one of the most wanted men in New York right now. And Eddie figures out he's being followed, and we get just an amazing sequence of Eddie being pushed in front of a subway train, which is an homage to Venom's first appearance when he pushes Peter in front of a subway. And the Venom symbiote, who he has been estranged with since issue 14 or so of the Venom series, rescuing him and revealing it's been following him this whole time, just keeping an eye on him. which makes sense. And then we fast forward to him helping, or Venom's able to incapacitate Carnage temporarily. Although it's odd that the police officers there didn't seem to do anything about Carnage once he was on the ground. Like, that seems like the perfect time to unload about 700 bullets into his face, but it doesn't happen for whatever reason. And then the next scene was Peter and Eddie hanging out in a diner, and Eddie catching Peter up on what's going on regarding Carnage, and it's just the best scene. Like, everything about it is just every moment of that scene hits me. And then they go and meet the Maker, who's been pretty big in the Venom run, and he says he needs a test subject to perfect a device that can pull the codex out of somebody without killing them and thus making them not be a target. Although I think being a living person still makes them a target, because it's Carnage. He'd probably do it just to spite people at that point. But so they go to the Ravencroft Institute for the Criminally Insane to track down Norman Osborn, who had the Red Goblin suit, had Carnage's symbiote actually prior to Carnage getting it. Well, Carnage doesn't have his symbiote. He has fragments of Null's symbiote that were applied to him in the Carnage Born one-shot. And then we get an interesting payoff / callback to the Cult of Carnage one-shot. Basically, the Web of Venom one-shots are proving to be somewhat canonically important in this event, which isn't surprising, really. But the Cult of Carnage one-shot featured John Jameson basically losing some time in a town that was previously controlled by Carnage, and waking up without knowing really what was going on. Misty Knight's robot arm kept disappearing. It was a thing. But so yeah, all in all, great book. I can't really recommend it enough for a first issue. I feel like it does a good job of catching people up with what they need to know to go into the event, but still does a great job of paying off. Was that? Paying off plot threads that have been coming out for a while. And then at the same time, I didn't really feel bored at any point, which is impressive to do with a 64-page issue. I didn't feel like there was a page wasted in this book. And it's funny going into it because Eddie being estranged with the symbiote, you feel like you're going to get at least an issue of depowered hero doing depowered hero things, which are always just the worst stories. But he gets the symbiote back in page 4 or something like that. It doesn't really make you wait. I'm going to kick it over to Ross now because I feel like I'm going on a little long. Ross, what did you think of Absolute Carnage?
Yeah, okay. So I approached this from a completely different angle. I read nothing in the run-up to this. I read the Free Comic Book Day comic, which was pretty good, but that was it. So in terms of art, it's really well drawn. I actually think there's 3 artists involved. Most of it's Stegman, but I think there was a couple of pages from JP Mayer and somebody else, if I'm not mistaken.
Usually.
I mean, it reads straight up like a horror to me, with the exception of the humor with Peter and the Spider-Man, the Spider-Man part of the book. It reads like a horror book. And, normally I avoid anything with symbiotes in it, like the Plague, but this was actually a good read. I mean, I'll go and read the next chapter, which is, I suppose, as somebody who's not reading anything leading up to this, that's a good thing. It actually has my interest.
And that actually is something I thought was really cool about it, was people who I characteristically would assume would be like, I'm not reading a book with Carnage in it, are enjoying this book. Like Cody. I didn't expect Cody to like it. I didn't think you would like it.
When you told me Absolute Carnage was one of the books, I was like, oh. Oh. And then, but actually, it was a good read. And that's me.
I didn't see who was next in the order. Who's next?
It'd go to Matt or Nick.
Okay, so I'll go. I was very pleasantly surprised by this book. Ross, I think you were spot on by identifying it, that it plays out like a horror comic, because it does straight from the start. This thing grabs the reader by the throat in a really visceral, just nasty, gnarly way from the start. And I was pleasantly surprised by that. I mean, obviously, for those of us fans that have been around long enough, the Maximum Carnage comparison was, of course, the first thing we thought of. And my response to an Absolute Carnage was just, oh, God. More of this, really? Because Carnage is a one-note character. You know, he's there. He's the darkest version of Spider-Man imaginable. He's not a character that's built for introspection or character arcs or anything like that. So in order to make Carnage work, you truly have to go with shock value. However, in the case of anytime you have a case like that, you're going to get increasingly diminishing returns. So it's been a while since I've read anything with Carnage. I know Marvel's been going kind of full bore with him for the last few years. And, you know, whatever, power to them. Someone's enjoying these books. That's fine. But for me to read this comic relatively cold as to where Carnage has been since the Century ripped him in half 15 years ago, I was down with it. Like, Carnage is truly menacing in this comic. And the fact that I was so into it was I was impressed, because I did not expect much from this thing. You know, it's a late summer event comic with a million tie-ins. You know, my usual attitude towards that is whatever. But very pleasantly surprised. I was also pleasantly surprised by Stegman's art. He's not an artist I'm typically into, but and I certainly didn't think his style would mesh well with a Carnage comic. But damn, dude pulled it off. This is a slick-looking book. Very, very impressed. Donny Cates continues maybe not do no wrong, but his batting average is pretty high right now. So that is my thoughts on Absolute Carnage.
Yeah, so I'll take over. I pretty much get excited for anything that Donny Cates does these days. I feel like he kind of is on his streak right now, where he's just doing a lot of great things, and even he recently tweeted about just being super busy and maybe needing to slow down. He's got a lot going on with Marvel, but his work with Venom has just been great. So this Absolute Carnage event, I was kind of ready to jump into. I haven't read a lot going into it, but I was glad that it was at least accessible enough to get me excited for the next issue. I felt kind of lost getting into the first few pages when he goes into the history of Null and what's going on with Carnage, but I think the length of the story helped it breathe a little bit so that it can take the time it needs to tell the story to get these readers into it, because it's a pretty big event and they've been hyping it pretty hard. I know there's been a little feud about it selling alongside X-Men and stuff, so it was cool that they lived up to this and really delivered something that's awesome. It's just really, really awesome. And this is coming from somebody who's not that big of a Carnage Venom fan. I enjoy what Cates is doing, and he got me excited for it. And he delivered once again, so that was super exciting to read. But not a lot to say that these other guys haven't said. I think they've kind of hit the nail on the head, and it's just awesome. Check it out. B?
Yeah. So I'm going to quote something from Parker from Absolute Carnage that I feel when I was told that I had to read this. I hate symbiote stuff so much. And I totally agree with that. I hate the whole idea of Venom. I hate the whole idea of Carnage, blah, blah, blah. However, with that being said, I absolutely enjoyed this book. Like, I was on it from the start. I really appreciated the one-liners that Parker gave to Eddie. I never even knew Eddie had a kid. I also took notes because that's what type of professional I am. So he got his powers back. I didn't know he didn't have his powers, so that was cool to see it back within a couple of pages. I didn't have to feel lost. I also like that Parker's had some great, like I said, great one-liners when he was like, "Oh, you must be hungry, Eddie," and he's all, no, the symbiotes take care of me, etc., etc. And that led Parker to be like, "Why does everything have to be so horrible with you?" It's hilarious. I mean, other than that, it's very much a horror book. It's an awesome book. If I'm not a fan, clearly, of this, I'm barely a fan of Peter Parker, or Spider-Man, rather. So reading this and being like, I'm definitely getting number 2 is a big step for Donny Cates. I think he did an awesome job with this issue. I think that the relationship between Parker and Eddie is what's going to make this book be successful because of their one-liners towards one of each other. If they can keep the comedy and the horror stuff going, I think it's going to be probably one of the better books of this year, if not, could be possibly one of our series for our 2020, mini-series that we have. I do also want to say that both color artist Frank Martin colored this one and the next one that we're going to review. So kudos. Frank Martin's been busy. That's all I got to say. Cody?
Yeah, and Frank Martin is a legend in this field. One of the all-time great colorists. I don't have a whole lot more to add to that. Basically, I'm in the same boat. I hate Carnage. I hate Venom. I grew up in the era of overexposure of symbiotes and all of that, Maximum Carnage and Venom Lethal Protector, and I never got into it. I don't care about them one bit, and that speaks very highly to the technical expertise that Cates and Stegman brought forth in this particular issue, because I don't care about the characters involved, but it was still a really well-constructed, well-paced, well-drawn story. So, I mean, that speaks volumes if you can get somebody that just is not into the characters, and that's the majority of us here, it seems like, to want to buy number 2. I didn't want to buy number 1, but but guess what? I'm going to do it. So, yeah, that speaks volumes. I think they're doing great work. And that is about all I have to say about that one. So why don't we move forward on to
Watcher Show? I will say that the 2 Carnage minis and Carnage USA are pretty good. They all have good Clayton Crane art and good story by Zeb Wells. Carnage USA in general in particular is actually really good and ties into the Cult of Carnage one-shot pretty heavily. Just throwing it out there as the one person who reads Venom and stuff comics.
Yeah, I'm probably still not going to read that. But so moving on into Berserker Unbound from Dark Horse. Berserker Unbound is written by Jeff Lemire, art by Mike Deodato Jr. This is a sword and sorcery, Conan-esque structured book that follows the tale of a man that calls himself the Berserker, the Mongrel King, and he's, fighting off hordes and comes back and his village is burnt and his wife and his child are dead. And he has nothing left to live for until he wanders into a magical cave and is transported to modern times, to what appears to be the United States. So, I mean, it follows a lot of the very well-trodden, typical tropes of sword and sorcery. Either, you've got a guy looking for revenge, you've got a guy running from love, or, since about the mid-'80s or so, one of the most common tropes is to pluck them out of their time and drop them somewhere in the future. So from that standpoint, this operates very much so like a typical sword and sorcery book. Like I said, written by Lemire, drawn by Deodato Jr. Matt, what were your thoughts on Berserker Unbound?
I enjoyed it. I wasn't blown away by it. Go ahead and start with the art, though. I will hazard to say that this is probably the book that Mike Deodato Jr. was born to draw, which leads me to wonder why didn't Marvel just pay him more money to draw Conan instead of Mahmoud Asrar, who, though very talented, was, in my opinion, a bad mismatch for that book. Because
The
this
worst.
is just like this. No, should there will be. I don't know. I don't get it because I mean this is for all intents and purposes a Conan comic, and not only is it a Conan comic, but it's a Conan comic we've seen before in the form of the issue of What If, where Conan the Barbarian is trapped in modern times. So I mean, shit, Marvel, you missed out. But hey, you know what? It's not a bad comic. Cody, as Cody said, it doesn't bring a lot to the table in terms of originality, of plot, or anything of that. And I think that's where it loses it, because Lemire's a talented writer when he wants to be. And I think this was to me anyway, this feels like a project that he had an idea, he thought it sounded cool, but maybe just didn't flesh it out enough in terms of to make it more his own. Because I read this and I really feel like any writer could have written this plot and this dialogue. There's nothing about this that inherently says this is a Jeff Lemire comic. And that sucks. Because when that guy's on, he's on. In the end, this book doesn't do enough that's interesting to make me feel compelled to revisit this world other than more awesome Mike Deodato art. So, that's my 2 cents on it. Nick, what did you think?
So I think as far as originality on this book, Deodato's art is to the point that it brings enough originality to make this book something special. The writing may not have done the heavy lifting, but maybe this is a book that isn't supposed to be approached that way. There are a lot of 2-page spreads and just epic visuals that make this book, I think, an original story outside of the Conan typical tropes that are explored. This isn't something that you're going to see anywhere because, honestly, this isn't art that you're going to see anywhere. This is just beautiful stuff just all throughout. And that being said, the trope that they brought in at the end kind of threw a wrench in my hopes for this comic, because that is ultimately one of my least favorites in the sword and sorcery genre, is to pluck him out of this fantasy world and put it into the modern world with all of our technology and socio-political circumstances. It introduces an entirely new aspect to the story, but it also draws away from what I loved about the beginning of this book, which was just awesome art from Deodato of this berserker slaying hordes upon hordes and discovering this magical realm or this cave that had all these different runes in it. So I will say my one hope is that these runes are going to be explored again really soon, because he went into one, I believe, to his left that were 2 spots over, and it brought him to our modern time. So if he can somehow get back, where do all the other ones take him? Are they different points in our time on Earth, or is it totally different realms entirely? Could be something cool about this book that could let Deodato explore some really cool stuff with his art. So that's something to be excited about, I think. And yeah, the tropes and partial cliches that this book relies on storytelling-wise, it is what it is. But there's enough there with the artistic value that I've got to check out the next book. I just have to. And that's pretty much everything. John, what do you think?
Oh, what did I just do? Hold up. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My phone. Oh, sorry. One sec. I don't know what I did. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. That's probably for the best. One sec.
We're taking this off the time that you can talk.
All right, there you are. Okay. I thought the book was pretty good overall. I was actually hoping for more in the current time and less of the past time. I feel like, me and Nick were discussing this earlier in the week. It might have been better if they did more in the current time with like the bulk of especially the first issue, because that's your hook, and they left it as a cliffhanger. but the cliffhanger is kind of lost since you already know it's the premise of the book. So I think it would have been better served to do something along the lines of like a, have it be set in modern times, but then have what the bulk of this issue is be shown as like flashbacks or something like that, and he's recovering from a past trauma that you don't see until say issue 4 or 5. But we're going to be dealing with fallout from the first issue for the next few issues, I have a feeling, which is fine, but it's less. It's not exactly what I was hoping for. I thought the art was amazing. There are definitely, like, there's a scene where you're looking at the burning village from a little ways away, and you're looking down at him mourning over his, and if you look at the edges, it starts to get a little bit sketchy, and it almost feels like shades of like a Sienkiewicz or something like that. It's so cool. And likewise, there's a splash page when he's dropping between universes, and there's just so much detail. I'm going to be probably looking at that for a while. There's a person in the background that you see who I'm curious might come back around. There's just a lot of really interesting stuff in there. I do feel, of all things, an odd reminiscence to Batman Rest in Peace, with him being guided by a grizzly old homeless guy. Because that was what the Batman Azur R was doing. Because the solicits show that the guy who finds him is going to be playing a part going forward, which is interesting. It's very interesting. But let me kick it over to Ross. Ross, what did you think?
Yeah, this is a beautifully drawn setup piece. At the end of the day, I mean, there's obviously a labor of love for Diodato. I mean, if I think of the last 5 things he's drawn compared to this is like 2 levels above the last 5 things he's drawn by easily, maybe 3 levels. It's beautifully colored. I mean, if you think about it for a second, a lot of red in both books this week. If you even look at the main character's eyes, they're actually more red than they are brown.
And they're both colored by Frank Martin.
And they're both colored by Frank Martin. I love the paneling. There's the double splash with the village with him in the focused middle piece. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But it is very much a setup piece. There's nothing original about the trope. There's nothing original in the first issue that made me go, oh wow, this is something different to the kind of fish out of water stories we've seen before. But I actually think the better part of the story is going to come in the next probably 2 issues. So, I mean, I would definitely pick up the next issue for the art alone. Never mind the story. I mean, Lemire can write. Okay, so we know he's capable of pulling out all the stops. So I say the next 2 issues will define whether or not this will be really great. And that's me.
I am regarding the talking about the sword and sorcery hero being brought to modern day trope. I do have to say that there's like a couple Conan what if issues, but besides, I mean, obviously it's kind of going on in Savage Avengers, but I feel like most people who say that would probably be troubled to name 5 specific situations where it happened. I don't know what constitutes a trope or a trend. It's a pretty obvious gimme plot. Like, it's not anything revolutionary. But that's what Lemire really excels at, is taking a plot that you would think every day, such as like a robot uprising in Descender, or Golden Age superheroes in Black Hammer. He takes very well explored ground and makes it something new and interesting, and maybe he'll apply that magic to this.
Yeah, I promise you, I was reading it now because I had to read it now because I didn't have a copy. So I read it just before the show. And I don't know if you remember a movie called Beastmaster. And there was a Beastmaster 2. And if you think of the cover of Beastmaster 2, there he is in his little loincloth and his sword running across, I think it's a New York highway or a bridge. That kind of just comes to mind when you read the first issue. I don't know, that just came to me when I was reading it.
What did you think, Arby?
So when Nick first told me that we were going to have to read Berserker and Carnage, I thought I was being punished for something. I was like, he hates me. Like, what is happening here? However, after reading it, I think I went in with such low expectations. What you guys are saying, I find complete BS. Not really. Because I enjoyed it way more than I thought it would. So my experience with the book is probably higher than, I would have normally went in. I do disagree with JJ on the cliffhanger at the end because it had it on the cover. A lot of times covers don't have anything to do with the story anymore, so who knows if that was actually going to be. Also, by the time I got to the part where he was going to be brought to the present, I had already forgotten about it because I was drawn into the story about him being in the past already. I was like, oh, right, I totally forgot that the cover said that he was going to be in the present day. The one thing I actually enjoyed his self-monologue a little bit. I know that some of you guys were talking about, like, this isn't Lemire's, not necessarily his best, but it didn't seem like one of his books kind of thing. I actually want to give him a lot of credit for some of his self-monologue because he was saying, as he is fighting and he is going forward, he says, I was born into this, I will die by the sword, or I'm paraphrasing, something along those lines. And when he was saying it, I got the impression that he doesn't really want to live this life. This is just the life that he is currently doing. Like, this is just my goal. This is what I have to do. It doesn't mean that I have to. I want to go back home to my wife and my kids because this is what I'm fighting for, even though I may not totally want to, do this. However, he may want to. It's just that there's that one line in how it is drawn. It made me feel like, oh, he doesn't really want to do it. It's just something he has to do. The whole family dying kind of thing, me told over and over again. I feel like I've heard the story 100 times, but it is what it is. And maybe that's just like it was a pretty small story about it, kind of like it wasn't that many pages of his family dying, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it was. I don't remember. I just remember it being a short part and just to tell the story, to get him to the present, to give him some type of character development. But other than that, I enjoyed it. I have more positive to walk away with it. I expected that I was going to hate this just when I saw the cover of it, but I was pleasantly surprised. The art, I really love the art. I did enjoy the pixelated art, but I think it would have looked better because I read it digital. I think it would have looked a little bit better on print. So that's my only thing. I like the penciling, the ink, whatever it's called. Some of it reminded me a little bit of Jim Lee. There's a little bit. Overall, I'm definitely going to get number 2. That's it. Nick? Or did Nick go? Cody? I don't know what you're doing
I think it's my turn, right?
Oh,
Nick,
okay.
I think Nick went. I lost track. I lost track because I'm utterly bored by this book. I thought this book was beautiful. I thought that this book was narratively completely worthless. It has potential to develop into something better. But for a number 1 issue, this highlighted every problem I have with the entire sword and sorcery genre. I've never read a sword and sorcery book that was paced well and that got anywhere fast enough to hook me. So this book did everything I expected it to do in all of the worst possible ways. Deodato, of course, is a legend. It was beautiful. His layouts were beautiful. Everything that he did in this book could easily be a pinup with no words, and I would still have the same result as far as the narrative goes. Like, I would still read it for the Deodato art, and I don't care about the story because there is no story. I mean, we know the story. Now, it could develop. I will absolutely give it credit. Within 6 issues or so, this could go somewhere that's actually worthwhile. But it ain't there yet. And that was an oversized first issue that did nothing. I mean, nothing that wasn't expected, nothing that you couldn't learn from reading the solicit. So, I see JJ is dying to say something.
Oh, yeah.
Ross said every time you say narrative, we get $5.
Yeah, that's $10 yours.
Each.
You're not wrong. Be honest,
Fair.
you're not wrong. But it was beautifully executed. But like I said, I think the writing is going to probably take off from next issue. This was complete setup.
Right.
Well, to me, the only time that Lemire has really knocked it out of the park in less than 6 issues has been Descender. I feel like, and even some like Black Hammer, it took me 2 trades to really click with Black Hammer. By the end of the first trade, I was not super into it. People were still raving about it, so I got volume 2. I still haven't even gotten volume 3. That's how excited about it I am. I don't care.
I haven't even started it yet.
Yeah, you can.
Mhm.
But Lemire, I'm fairly hot and cold on. I like a lot of stuff he does. Sorry, I'm in downtown Seattle at rush hour. You're going to hear some honking and sirens. But this is one I'm willing to give him a shot on. And like I said, he is really good and really big on taking well-established tropes and then giving them some kind of flair that makes them interesting. It would be interesting if, like Nick said, he took it in a socio-political angle, which might happen considering he's traveling with pretty much the lowest of the low. And it seems like, you know, being a king and whatnot, he was probably living pretty opulently on before. So seeing how the other half live might be something that, you know, strikes him, or it might be something that's more similar to a barbarian's life than anything else.
So, hey, if I may throw a couple things out there real quick. Cody, you mentioned that, you know, you thought maybe by like issue 5 or 6 this thing might come together, but it's unfortunately just a 4-issue miniseries, unless I've been misinformed.
I didn't know that.
With a quarter of the story already done, I feel like a whole lot of ground has just been wasted on setup. And I mean, wasted is in the eye of the beholder, because we got some gorgeous double splash pages out of it and just great art in general. But I agree with you guys that this thing probably should have since we already knew what the hook was going in, you know, maybe the stuff back in Hyboria or wherever it is he was at was just like some quick, you know, flashbacks or what have you. I think that was a missed opportunity on Lemire's part. Nothing that can be done about it now, but, you know, it is what it is. And then
so much table setting in the Hyborian age, or whatever you want to call it, too, that are stuff that most likely are never coming back around.
And then actually just Arby, to some, it's funny that you mentioned that you saw some shades of Jim Lee in the art, because I mean, if you guys can remember back to Deodato's earliest art, circa 94, 95, he really was just kind of a Jim Lee clone. He hadn't come into his own yet. So it's interesting that you would pick up on that now when his art style has evolved so much. I just think that's interesting and worth noting. That there's still, and I you know, now I think about it, there's some close-ups there with lots of cross-hatching, some little signature Jim Lee moves, but, you know, just interesting. So, y'all have any other thoughts on it?
No, I mean, knowing now that it's a 4-issue miniseries, that to me speaks directly to it being mostly a vanity project. This is, and it makes sense. That's how Dark Horse typically does it. But yeah, this is most likely a Deodato wants to do a Conan story. He didn't get to do a Conan story. Lemire writes a lot for Dark Horse, so they've got him like in their bullpen. Here, why don't you guys get together and let Deodato do his 4 issues of Conan and go wild with it, do whatever you want to do with it. And at the end of the day, it'll probably end up being I don't want to say throwaway book, but I mean, just a book that, you know, gets collected and gets thrown up on shelves, and some people love it and some people don't care about it. And at the end of the day, like, this isn't going to win any awards. It's not going to make a mark on the industry, but it's a thing that's out there.
It could come the Watchies. you never know who's going to pick up a Watchy this year or next year, I guess.
Yeah, I would be pretty shocked if, even as gorgeous as this was, that Deodato, with his sparse body of work so far this year, was up for Artist of the Year, but we'll see. We'll see.
The Habra.
Now that I know it's 4 issues, as I said, I literally said it 3 minutes ago. I've never known Lemire to pay off in less than 6.
Yeah. Yeah, I get a feeling this is a story secondary, art first. And that's cool. Do it. I mean, we're rehashing everything else from the 90s. We read a Carnage book, so I mean, why not go art first, story second?
No.
All right, so that brings us to our final segment, which is what have you been reading and what are you looking forward to, starting with Matt?
So, in the year of our Lord, 1998, Grant Morrison gave us DC 1 million, and it was glorious. And I got the omnibus, and it's every single issue that DC did that month, which was all a DC 1 million tie-in. Fantastic. I love this thing. Even the issues that aren't so well written, they're just fun. And you know, DC banged this whole thing out in a month back in the day. Subverted their whole line, got 4 issues of this miniseries out, bam, it's done. I really want to see us do a return to this today. So yeah, just reading this takes me back to not just my youth, misspent though it may have been, but to a time when we didn't have to have these event series stretched out over 7/8 of the year with 85 tie-ins. You know, whatever. I'm an old man now. What can I tell you? What I'm looking forward to, a twofer from Brian Michael Bendis. We've got Batman Universe #2, which, as you may recall, everyone on the show was pretty high on last month when it came out. And Event Leviathan #3, which has been, both books have been extremely surprising to me in terms of quality and just general enjoyment. And it reinforces the fact that street level stuff is what Bendis does best. Oh my God, why isn't he writing Batman? Blah, 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 blah. I won't subvert the conversation too much more with that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to both those books in equal measure because they've both been kicking a lot of ass. So, Arby, how about you?
I read recently, Coffin Girl. It came out, or Coffin Bound. It came out this week. It took me a day after I read it. I reviewed it. I probably actually lowered my review on it more than I feel about it now. Like, I probably would have given it a higher score before. Because normally when I read it, I was like, okay, it's a good story. I mean, it's a really good story, but I definitely think everybody should check it out. But when I was doing my review, I think I was fresh out of it. And usually I don't know what I think about it until after, like, you know, a day or two after you sit there and think about it. And if you're still thinking about it, it's a good book. And that's what ended up happening with me. I ended up thinking about it for a couple of days, different segments of it, thinking where it could go. So for me, that meant I enjoyed it way more than my actual review was, which was still pretty high, by the way. I mean, it was like a 7.8 or something. So I read that, and I think everybody should check that out. What I'm looking forward to most right now that's coming out, probably Superman, I would say. What about you, JJ and Ross?
The end of the Unity saga, at last.
Yeah.
That's what we've all been wanting. We finally, maybe we'll find out what species Rogozar is. Just that. Just give me a little something.
Nope.
As for what I've been reading last night, I read so much. I'll just say that literally the last thing I read. Last night I read the 1991 Superman arc that ran across Action Comics, or Superman, Adventures of Superman, and Action Comics, Dark Knight over Metropolis, which is a phenomenal story of a murder in Gotham City that has ties back to Metropolis that results in Batman coming to investigate. And is also for people who like their key issues. Is where Batman got the kryptonite ring that he keeps in his belt in post-crisis continuity. But it was really interesting, and I did notice, interestingly, I'm just going to keep saying interesting. Interestingly, I did notice a scene in that book in Superman 44 that totally reflected a scene in Batman versus Superman. Snyder likes to do homages like that. And so that was just an interesting one. I know it's hardly anybody's favorite movie, but it's neat when you see like dialogue from a comic and you're like, oh, they totally did that scene and I didn't catch it. It's a total throwaway scene. It's kind of interesting. As for what I'm looking forward to, we have As for what I'm looking forward to, we have Conan Exodus from Isad Ribic, writing and drawing it. I know I've been enjoying Ribic's covers on Conan and been quietly horrified by his comic covers on Fantastic Four. But I've never seen him write before. So, but I'm gonna give it a shot, and he showed some preview art from it that just looks great. So I think, not unlike Berserker this week, if nothing else, it'll be entertaining to look at. How about you, Ross?
I'm not really keeping up because I'm on holiday, but I'm looking forward to the Alpha Flight one-shot, which is coming out next week, I believe. That should be good. And Web of Black Widow. I saw some preview art from Mooney, and it's written by Hauser, and I actually think it's the Black Widow series we should have got last time. I have to be quite honest with you. I'm really, really excited about that. And then, of course, it's the usual Hickman X nonsense, which I love. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
He means vacation.
We call it a holiday. You guys call it a vacation.
I'm impressed that we commented on your accent yet.
Yeah, this is my normal accent when I talk like the claw. Anyway.
I'm working on it for next week so we have some continuity.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Ross is back.
I'll try not to sound like a drunk Australian.
Listen, I've been called Australian at least 3 times since I've been here already, okay?
I make no promises.
Who was next? Darby? Cody?
I guess I'll go ahead and take over. So what I've been reading, still on the Valiant train. I've been on that for weeks now, and now I'm on to Rye. I've been reading the series that released first from, I believe it was Matt Kent and Clayton Crane. They had Volume 1 and Volume 2, and it's a sci-fi futuristic samurai who is set apart from the continuity that I've been following from the Harbinger Wars and all that with Valiant. So this is something that's kind of standalone, and it's really enjoyable. It brought a lot of different aspects to sci-fi that I liked, so it hooked me in, and the artwork is just amazing. The digitization of it, I guess if that's a word even, it's been so heavily altered to the point that
really big on that. He did those Carnage minis I was talking about too, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's something that almost everybody talks about when you mention Rye, because as soon as you open the book, you kind of see what I'm talking about. It's just, it's unlike anything I've really seen before, and it works so well for the sci-fi futuristic take of the story. Rye is this samurai that is made up of mostly the live wire energy that comes from, the character and all that they've explored so far. And he's able to transport through this New Japan location almost instantaneously, and he acts as this New Japan's protector. So it's almost a superhero story too, and they throw a twist in the motives of this superhero and what he's doing in New Japan. It's really cool stuff. And they recently announced a new series that's coming out in November, I believe, from Dan Abnett and Juan Jose Rip, And they described it. Yeah, they described it as Lone Wolf and Cub meets Mad Max meets robot dinosaurs. So it's a wild explanation for this book, and when you read Volume 1 and Volume 2 and try to see how it's leading into that, it's just really crazy. And it's once again a testament to the types of stories that Valiant's got going on. They're just doing super cool stuff that every book I dive into, I find I love. And last thing, to speak to the criticism towards Jeff Lemire about his stories taking too long to come together or anything, he did the Valiant that was 4 issues long that kind of introduced all these new characters, and it was awesome. He did it alongside Matt Kent, of course, but he was part of that 4 issues long. You'll love Valiant. You'll want to see more. I've raved about this book before on this show even. Just check it out. And Jeff Lemire's a huge part of that. Cody?
I did just read Unity, actually, and At War with Unity, with the Ecto Manowar trade. Those were both great. That was Kent on Unity, and I think that was Phil Venditti on Manowar. They're both really good. Sorry.
No, Kent has just been great on most everything I've read of him at Valiant, and kind of sad he's not, being more involved with some of this newer stuff, but I'm super excited for it.
I'm really excited for the Steely Bloodshot series coming up, too, with Brett Booth.
Yeah, going to be great.
Yeah, I thought of one more thing that I actually am looking forward to is Dylan and Mora's Once and Future.
Oh, totally.
From Boom, which has gone to 3rd printing before it's been released.
Is it my turn yet? Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Now that every book that I had earmarked to say I was looking forward to has been said, I keep going back to the list like, okay, I got to think of something else. No, all right.
You don't get a turn. Sorry.
I'm looking forward to basically everything that everybody already friggin' said. Just one by one, systematically destroying it.
Steely Bloodshot?
Killing me.
I mean, you can't even give the ups to Hawkman this week because the art has been so bad.
Yeah, no, I'm super not looking forward to Hawkman this week, which really bums me out. I'm not looking forward to anything that DC's Year of the Villain has to offer at this point. So as for what I've been reading, I didn't read a whole lot this week because last weekend, as I mentioned, was the Comic-Con Honolulu 2019. So I spent the weekend running around, hanging out with creators, getting books signed, and getting interviews for Comic Watch. So I wanted to quick plug that you can keep your eyes peeled for my David Mack interview, Amy Reeder, Howard Mackey, Tom Grummett, Tom DeFalco, Dasha Cosplay, Agnes Garboska, and Mark Brooks. So that's
you're putting me under pressure for the next cons that we do. You know that, hey?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm feeling the pressure. I'm feeling the pressure now.
You better. I'll give you all my tips now.
I think he mentioned something about like Spider-Man one shot. I don't know.
I'm not going to ask anybody if they were a car, what would they be this year? I'm going to actually have some real questions.
What's your favorite?
No jokes. I actually asked that at the last con because I'd made questions at the last minute. Yeah.
You didn't use would Tyler have the easy interview questions that he distributed?
Tyler wasn't involved. Tyler had to send them this note saying I worked for Comic Watch so I could get authorized to actually get in for free.
Oh.
Yeah, that was Tyler's involvement.
Yeah, I'm gonna try for Emerald City this year, which is a huge con, so I might not make the cut. But I'm gonna try to get on press for Emerald City and get some interviews.
When is that, JJ?
March next year.
Yeah, it's usually one of the very first conventions of convention season.
I'm already watching their site for because they give out a limited number of press passes a year. So I'm already watching their site for when they say that they're giving out press passes, and I want to be like the 10th person to email, and hopefully that way I'll get one. So I'm like that person who shows up 3 hours early to a party, and I'm just kind of sitting there like, "Oh, what you doing?"
And that, I believe, does it for this week's episode of Comic Watchers. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and SoundCloud and iTunes and Podbean and Spotify. Check out everything that's new and coming from Comic Watch at www.comic-watch.com, at Comic Watch Ace on Twitter, at C Watchers Show on Twitter, and the Comic Watchers Show on Facebook. Anybody have any final thoughts?
Toodaloo.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
What's your local comic shop?